The whiskey-soaked laughter from the saloon stung worse than the scars on Jessica Zimmerman's face ever had. And she knew before the stagecoach even came to a complete stop in Wheatland, Wyoming, that she had made a terrible mistake coming here. It was July of 1878, and the dust from the journey still clung to her dark blue traveling dress as she stepped down onto the wooden platform. The oppressive summer heat bore down on her shoulders, but she kept her bonnet low, the wide brim casting shadows across the right side of her face where the fire had left its permanent mark 3 years ago. The scars ran from her temple down to her jaw, puckered and raised, a testament to the night her family's home had burned to the ground in Philadelphia, taking her parents and younger brother with it. She clutched the worn leather case that held everything she owned and pulled the folded letter from her pocket. The words were committed to memory by now, but seeing them gave her courage. Grant Calloway had written to her through the matrimonial agency with such kindness, such genuine interest in finding a companion for his ranch outside of Wheatland. He had not asked for a photograph, which she had taken as a blessing. She had been honest in her letters about the scars, about the fire, about her losses. He had written back that a woman's character mattered more than her appearance, that he needed a partner with strength and resilience, and that anyone who had survived what she had surely possessed those qualities. Now, standing in the harsh light of the Wyoming sun, she wondered if he had truly understood what scarred meant. Jessica Zimmerman. A voice called from behind her, and she turned to see a young woman approaching, perhaps 25 or so, with auburn hair and a friendly smile. "I am Margaret, Grant Calloway's neighbor. He asked me to meet you and bring you to the hotel. He is finishing some business with the cattle broker but will join us for supper." Jessica nodded, relief washing through her. At least she would have time to compose herself, to prepare for the meeting that would determine her entire future. Margaret led her down the main street, chattering pleasantly about the town, the weather, the upcoming harvest festival. Jessica tried to focus on her words, but she could not help noticing the stares from people they passed. A group of women outside the general store fell silent as they approached, their eyes widening as they took in Jessica's appearance. She heard the whispers start as soon as they passed. "Did you see her face? Poor thing. Surely Grant cannot be expected to marry that." Jessica's steps faltered, but Margaret linked her arm through Jessica's and squeezed gently. "Pay them no mind. Small towns breed small minds sometimes. Grant is a good man, the best I know, truth be told." The hotel was modest but clean, and Margaret helped her settle into the small room on the second floor. A basin of water sat on the washstand, and Jessica gratefully cleaned the dust from her hands and face, careful around the scarred tissue that still felt tight sometimes. "I will return in 2 hours to bring you to the dining room," Margaret said from the doorway. "Wear something that makes you feel confident. Grant is not a man who judges on surfaces." After Margaret left, Jessica unpacked her few dresses and chose the green cotton one that brought out her eyes. Her left side was unmarred, and she had been told more than once that her eyes were her best feature, a warm brown that tilted up slightly at the corners. Her dark hair was thick and healthy, and she arranged it carefully, knowing it was vanity but unable to help herself. She wanted to look her best, even if best would never mean beautiful again. When Margaret returned, Jessica descended the narrow stairs with her heart hammering against her ribs. The dining room was half full, mostly men who had come in from the ranches for business in town. She felt their eyes on her as she crossed the room, heard the conversation stutter and stop. Then she saw him. Grant Calloway stood as she approached, and her first thought was that the letters had not prepared her for how solid he seemed. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that spoke of hard work and a life spent outdoors. His hair was dark brown, almost black and slightly too long, curling at his collar. His face was tanned and weathered from the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often. He looked to be in his late 20s, perhaps 30 at most. But it was his eyes that caught her, a startling gray blue that met hers directly without flinching or shifting away to the scarred side of her face. "Miss Zimmerman," he said, and his voice was deep and warm. "I am mighty glad you made it safely. Please sit down." He pulled out her chair, and she settled into it, acutely aware that the entire dining room was watching this meeting. Margaret sat across from her, and Grant took the seat at the end of the table, positioned so he could see both of them. "I hope the journey was not too difficult," Grant continued, signaling the server for water. "I know it is a long way from Philadelphia." "It was fine," Jessica said, and was proud that her voice came out steady. "The stage coach was crowded but made good time." A man's voice carried from the table behind them, not even bothering to lower his tone. "Shame about Calloway. Fine rancher, could have had his pick of women. Instead he settles for damaged goods." Jessica's hands clenched in her lap, her face burning. She started to rise, ready to flee back to her room to catch the next stage back east, but Grant's hand reached across the table and gently covered hers. "Stay," he said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made her meet his eyes. What she saw there was not pity but anger on her behalf, and a steadiness that made her breathe easier. He stood, turning to face the man who had spoken. "Thomas Brennan," Grant said, his voice carrying clearly through the now silent room. "I would expect better manners from a man whose own face looks like a horse's backside, but I suppose that would be asking too much. Miss Zimmerman is my guest and my intended, and any disrespect toward her is disrespect toward me. I trust you understand what that means." The man, Brennan, flushed red and looked down at his plate. The threat was implicit but clear. Grant Calloway was not a man to be crossed lightly. Grant sat back down, and gradually the conversations in the room resumed, though at a more subdued level. Jessica found herself staring at him, surprised by his defense of her, by the protectiveness in his tone. "Thank you," she said softly. "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did," Grant replied simply. "You wrote to me honestly about what you had been through, about your scars." I wrote back honestly that it did not matter to me. Those words are not just writing on paper. I meant them. The server brought their meals, roasted beef and vegetables with fresh bread, and they ate while making careful conversation. Grant asked about her journey, about Philadelphia, about her life before the fire. She found herself relaxing incrementally, drawn in by his genuine interest, by the way he listened when she spoke. "I have a ranch about 5 miles outside of town," Grant explained as they finished eating. "It is not the largest spread, but it is mine, built with my own hands over the past 8 years. I run cattle, about 200 head right now, and I have a small herd of horses I am breeding for ranch work. The house is solid, 2 bedrooms upstairs and a large main room with a kitchen. It is not fancy, but it is comfortable." "It sounds wonderful," Jessica said, and meant it. After 3 years of living in a boarding house, working as a seamstress for barely enough to cover her room and meals, the idea of a real home was almost more than she could hope for. "I should be honest with you as well," Grant continued, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup. "Ranch life is hard work. I am not looking for a decoration or someone to just keep house. I need a true partner, someone who can work beside me, who is not afraid of the rough parts of this life. Wyoming is beautiful, but it is not easy, especially for women used to city living." Jessica met his gaze directly. "I am not afraid of hard work. I have been supporting myself since the fire, and I know I am capable of more than sewing seams. I want to be useful, to have purpose. I want a life, not just an existence. Something shifted in Grant's expression, a softening around his eyes. Then I think we might suit each other well, Miss Zimmerman. Please, she said, call me Jessica. Jessica, he repeated, and she liked the way her name sounded in his voice. And you should call me Grant. We are to be married, after all. Seems foolish to be formal. They talked for another hour until the dining room had mostly cleared out. Margaret had excused herself earlier, saying she would see them both at church on Sunday. When Grant finally stood to leave, night had fallen outside the windows. I will be back tomorrow morning to show you the ranch if you would like, he offered. I know you probably want to see what you are getting into before you make any final decisions. I would like that very much, Jessica agreed. He walked her to the stairs leading up to her room and paused at the bottom step. In the lamplight, his face was all planes and shadows, handsome in a rugged way that made her heart beat faster. Jessica, he said, and hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. I know today was difficult. Small-minded people will always find something to say. But I want you to know that when I look at you, I see a beautiful woman who has survived something terrible and had the courage to travel halfway across the country to start over. That takes more strength than most people have. Those scars are proof of your survival, not something to be ashamed of. Jessica felt tears prick her eyes and she blinked them back. No one had said anything like that to her in 3 years. Most people either stared or looked away quickly, uncomfortable with her appearance. Grant did neither. He simply saw her. "Thank you," she whispered. He tipped his hat to her and left, and she climbed the stairs to her room with something warm unfurling in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, this could work. The next morning dawned clear and hot, and Jessica dressed in her simplest dress, knowing they would be riding out to the ranch. She had not been on a horse in years, not since before the fire, but she had grown up riding in the countryside outside Philadelphia, where her father had kept a small stable. Grant arrived with a gentle mare for her, a pretty chestnut with a white star on her forehead. "This is Daisy," he said, holding the reins as Jessica mounted. "She is calm and steady, good for getting used to riding again." His own horse was a tall bay gelding, powerful and alert. Grant swung into the saddle with easy grace, and they set out at a walk through the town and onto the open range beyond. Wyoming spread out around them in vast rolling plains, the grass gone golden in the summer heat. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and blue against the horizon. The sky seemed endless, bigger than any sky Jessica had ever seen in the east. The wind carried the scent of sage and sun-warmed earth, and despite everything, she felt something in her chest expand with possibility. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and Grant pointed out landmarks, other ranches, a creek that ran through his property. The rhythm of the horse beneath her was soothing, familiar, and Jessica found herself relaxing into it. "You ride well," Grant observed. "I was not sure, coming from the city." "My father loved horses," Jessica explained. "We had a small place outside Philadelphia, just enough land for a stable and paddock. He taught me to ride when I was 6 years old. After he died in the fire, everything was sold to pay debts. I have not ridden since." "I am sorry about your family," Grant said quietly. "That kind of loss is not something you get over easily." "No," Jessica agreed. "You learn to live with it, but it never fully heals. Some mornings I still wake up and forget for a moment that they are gone. Then I remember, and it is like losing them all over again." Grant was quiet for a moment, then said, "I lost my parents too, though not in a fire. Cholera when I was 19. They had just started this ranch, barely had the house built. My younger sister went to live with our aunt in Denver, and I stayed to keep the ranch going. It was what my father would have wanted. "Do you see your sister often?" Jessica asked. "Not as much as I would like. She married a banker there, has 2 little ones now. But Denver is a fair distance, and the ranch keeps me busy. I try to visit once a year." They crested a rise, and Grant pointed ahead. "There, that is home." The ranch house sat in a small valley with the creek running through it, trees growing along the water. The house was built of logs, sturdy and well-maintained, with a covered porch across the front. A barn stood nearby, along with several other outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the pasture beyond, and Jessica could see horses in a corral near the barn. It was simple, isolated, and the most welcoming sight she had seen in years. They rode down to the house, and Grant helped her dismount. His hands at her waist were strong and sure, and he did not release her immediately when her feet touched the ground. "What do you think?" he asked, and she could hear the slight uncertainty in his voice, as if her opinion mattered to him. "I think it is perfect," Jessica said honestly. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face, and she caught her breath at how handsome he was when he smiled. Grant showed her through the house, pointing out the wood stove he had installed, the shelves he had built, the large windows that let in plenty of light. The furniture was simple but well made, and everything was surprisingly neat for a bachelor's home. "I have a woman from town, Mrs. Patterson, who comes once a week to help with laundry and deep cleaning," Grant explained. "But I try to keep things orderly on my own. My mother always said a clean home was a peaceful home." Upstairs, there were 2 bedrooms, one clearly his with its large bed and simple furnishings, and the other set up as a guest room. "I thought when you arrived, you might want your own space until we are married," Grant said, a slight color rising in his cheeks. "I know we are engaged through the letters, but we barely know each other yet. I did not want you to feel pressured." Jessica felt her heart warm toward him even more. He was being respectful, giving her time and space to be sure of her decision. It was more consideration than she had expected. "That is very thoughtful," she said. "I appreciate it." They went back downstairs, and Grant made coffee while Jessica explored the kitchen. It was well stocked, with a good stove and plenty of cookware. She ran her hand over the wooden table, imagining meals here, conversations, a life being built. "There is something else I should tell you," Grant said as he poured the coffee. "The reason I wrote to the matrimonial agency in the first place." Jessica took the cup he offered and waited. "I was engaged before, about 2 years ago, to a woman from Cheyenne. Her name was Caroline, and I met her when I was selling cattle there. We courted for 6 months, and I thought we wanted the same things. But when she came to see the ranch, she hated it. Said it was too isolated, too rough, that she could not possibly live so far from civilization. She gave me an ultimatum: sell the ranch and move to Cheyenne, or the engagement was off." "And you chose the ranch," Jessica said. "I did. Not because I valued it more than her, but because she was asking me to give up everything my parents had worked for, everything I had built, without any willingness to compromise. I realized then that we did not love each other, not really. We loved the idea of each other, but the reality did not match." He looked at Jessica over his coffee cup. "I want you to know that, so you understand what this place means to me, and so you can be honest if ranch life is not what you want. I would rather know now than have you be miserable later." Jessica set down her cup and moved to the window, looking out at the land stretching away in all directions. "Grant, I am going to be honest with you as well. I have nothing to go back to. The boarding house where I lived barely tolerated me, because my scars made some of the other residents uncomfortable. The woman I worked for as a seamstress paid me half what she paid the other girls, because she said customers did not like looking at me when they came for fittings. I have been invisible for 3 years, or worse, something people actively avoid looking at. When I got your letters, the way you wrote about partnership, about building something together, it was the first time since the fire that anyone had made me feel like I could have a future, not just an existence. She turned to face him. I am not afraid of isolation or hard work. I am afraid of being alone in a crowd, of being treated like something broken and useless. Here, with you, I feel like maybe I could be whole again. So no, I do not need time to think about it. I want to stay. I want to marry you and build a life here. Grant set down his own cup and crossed the room to stand in front of her. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and gently touched her face, his fingers tracing the line of the scars from her temple down to her jaw. His touch was feather-light, reverent almost, and Jessica found herself frozen, hardly breathing. "Jessica," he said softly, his gray-blue eyes locked on hers. "You are beautiful, not in spite of these scars, but because of everything they represent. You survived. You are here. You are strong enough to start over in a place you have never been, with a man you barely know. That is beautiful. You are beautiful." A sob caught in Jessica's throat, and tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. 3 years of holding herself together, of pretending the stares and whispers did not hurt, of believing she would never be seen as anything but damaged, all of it broke open at his words. She pressed her hand over her mouth, trying to stifle the sound, but Grant pulled her gently into his arms and held her while she cried. He did not tell her to stop or that it was all right. He just held her, one hand smoothing over her hair, solid and steady and warm. When the tears finally subsided, Jessica pulled back, embarrassed. "I am sorry," she said, wiping at her face. "I did not mean to fall apart like that." "You have nothing to be sorry for," Grant said firmly. "I imagine you have been holding that in for a long time. Better to let it out." They spent the rest of the day at the ranch. Grant showed her the barn, introducing her to the horses, and let her help him feed the chickens that roamed near the house. They walked down to the creek, where the water ran clear and cold over smooth stones, and Grant pointed out the best spots for fishing. "In the winter, this freezes solid," he said. "But come spring, the runoff from the mountains makes it swell to 3 times this size. It is something to see." Jessica could imagine it. The seasons turning, the land changing. A life measured not in days but in cycles of planting and harvest, of cattle being born and sold, of winters survived and springs celebrated. As the sun began to lower toward the horizon, Grant saddled the horses again for the ride back to town. Jessica was reluctant to leave, but she knew propriety demanded she return to the hotel, at least until they were married. "How long do you want to wait?" Grant asked as they rode. "For the wedding, I mean. We can take time to get to know each other better if you want, or we can do it sooner. Whatever makes you comfortable." Jessica considered. Part of her wanted to be cautious, to take months to be certain. But a larger part, the part that had felt at home in his house, that had felt safe in his arms, wanted to move forward to start the life she had been dreaming of. "I do not want to wait long," she admitted. "Is that too forward? Too improper?" "Not at all," Grant said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "I was hoping you would say that. How about 2 weeks? That gives you time to settle in, meet people in town, and we can arrange things with the minister. Margaret offered to help with whatever you need." 2 weeks sounds perfect," Jessica agreed. They rode back to Wheatland as the sky turned orange and gold with sunset. When they reached the hotel, Grant helped her down from the horse and stood holding her hands for a moment. "Thank you for today," he said. "For being honest with me and for saying yes to this life. I will do my best to make sure you never regret it." "I do not think I will," Jessica said, and realized she meant it. Over the next 2 weeks, Jessica divided her time between the hotel and the ranch. Grant would collect her each morning, and she would spend the day learning the rhythms of ranch life. Margaret became a good friend, coming by often to help Jessica shop for fabric to make new curtains for the ranch house, and to teach her some of the practical skills she would need. "Ranch wives have to be tough," Margaret explained as she showed Jessica how to kill and pluck a chicken. "We do not have the luxury of being delicate, but it is a good life if you do not mind the work." Margaret's husband William ran the neighboring ranch, and the two couples often shared meals. William was quiet but kind, and he treated Jessica with the same easy acceptance that Grant did, which she appreciated. Not everyone in Wheatland was so accepting. The women who had whispered about her that first day continued to stare whenever Jessica came to town. At church that first Sunday, she felt their eyes on her throughout the service, heard the whispered conversations. But Grant sat beside her, solid and unwavering, and introduced her to the minister afterward with clear pride in his voice. "Reverend Thomas, this is Jessica Zimmerman, my fiancée. We would like to arrange a wedding ceremony in 2 weeks if you are available." Reverend Thomas was an older man with kind eyes and a gentle manner. He shook Jessica's hand warmly. "I would be honored. Why do not you both come by the rectory tomorrow and we can discuss the details?" As they walked back toward the hotel, a group of women stood on the boardwalk ahead of them. Jessica recognized them from church, the wives of some of the prominent businessmen in town. She started to cross the street to avoid them, but Grant kept walking straight ahead, and she had no choice but to follow. "Grant," one of the women said as they approached, her voice sugary sweet, "we were just talking about you. Is it true you are planning to marry this woman in 2 weeks? That seems awfully hasty." "Good afternoon, Mrs. Turner," Grant said evenly. "Yes, Jessica and I are to be married. I do not see how the timing is anyone's concern but ours." Mrs. Turner's eyes flicked over Jessica, lingering on her scars. "Well, I suppose you know your own business. Though I must say, some of us were surprised you did not choose someone more suitable. There are several perfectly nice young women here in Wheatland who would have been glad of your attention." Jessica felt her face flush hot, but before she could speak, Grant stepped closer to Mrs. Turner, his voice going cold in a way Jessica had not heard before. "I am going to say this once, Mrs. Turner, and I hope you will share it with your friends. Jessica is exactly who I choose, and she is perfectly suitable in every way. In fact, she is more than I deserve. Anyone who suggests otherwise is not welcome at our home or on our land. I trust I have made myself clear." Mrs. Turner's mouth opened and closed like a fish, and the other women looked uncomfortable. Grant offered his arm to Jessica, and they walked past the group with their heads high. Once they were out of earshot, Jessica let out a shaky breath. "You are going to make enemies if you keep defending me like that. They were already not my friends if they think it is acceptable to treat you that way," Grant said firmly. "Besides, I meant what I said. You are more than I deserve. I got lucky the day you answered that advertisement." Jessica squeezed his arm, warmth spreading through her chest. She was falling in love with him, she realized. It had been creeping up on her over the past 2 weeks, in the small kindnesses, the way he listened when she talked, the respect he showed her. But it hit her fully in that moment, standing on the dusty street of Wheatland with Grant defending her honor to the town busybodies. She was in love with him. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. She had not expected to feel this way so quickly, had thought this would be a practical arrangement, a partnership built on mutual need rather than passion. But there was nothing practical about the way her heart raced when he smiled at her, or the way her skin tingled when his hand brushed hers. The wedding day arrived on a Wednesday morning in late July. Jessica dressed in the hotel room with Margaret's help, wearing a cream-colored dress they had made together from fabric Grant had insisted on buying for her. It was simple but beautiful, with lace at the collar and cuffs, and Jessica felt pretty in it, despite the scars. Margaret had woven wildflowers into Jessica's hair, and she looked at herself in the small mirror with wonder. The scarred side of her face was still visible, but somehow it mattered less now. Grant had traced those scars with such tenderness, had called her beautiful with such conviction, that she was beginning to believe it herself. The ceremony was held at the small church, with just a handful of people in attendance. Margaret and William stood as witnesses, and a few of Grant's ranch hands came, men who had met Jessica over the past weeks and welcomed her with easy acceptance. Reverend Thomas performed the service with warmth and sincerity, and when Grant slipped a simple gold band on her finger, Jessica felt tears prick her eyes again. "I promise to be a true partner to you," Grant said, his gray-blue eyes locked on hers. "To respect you, support you, and build a life with you that honors us both. You are my choice, Jessica, today and always." Jessica's voice trembled as she said her own vows, promising to stand beside him through whatever came, to be a true companion and helpmate. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them married and Grant kissed her, it was gentle and sweet and full of promise. The small group celebrated with a meal at the hotel, and then Grant and Jessica rode out to the ranch together as husband and wife. The sun was beginning to set as they arrived, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Grant helped Jessica down from her horse and lifted her into his arms, carrying her across the threshold of the house. She laughed, surprised and delighted by the gesture, and he set her down gently in the main room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Calloway," he said softly. "It feels strange to be called that," Jessica admitted, "but good strange." Grant had prepared a simple supper earlier, and they ate together at the table, talking quietly. There was a new awareness between them now, the knowledge that they would share a bed tonight, that they were truly married in all ways. Jessica felt nervous but not afraid. Grant had been nothing but patient and gentle with her. When they finally went upstairs, Grant lit the lamp in his room, now their room, and turned to face her. "Jessica, I want you to know there is no pressure tonight. We can take things as slowly as you need." "I am nervous," Jessica admitted. "But I want this. I want to be your wife in every way." Grant crossed to her and cupped her face in his hands, being careful of the scars. "You are so brave," he murmured. "I am in awe of you." He kissed her then, deeper than before, and Jessica felt heat unfurl in her belly. She reached up to unbutton his shirt, her fingers fumbling slightly, and Grant helped her, shrugging out of it and tossing it aside. His chest was broad and muscled, tanned from working shirtless in the summer heat, and Jessica ran her hands over it, marveling at the feel of him. He unlaced her dress slowly, kissing her neck and shoulders as he did, and soon they were both down to their undergarments. Jessica felt self-conscious for a moment, aware of her scars extending down her neck and shoulder, but Grant traced them with his fingers and lips, murmuring how beautiful she was, how strong, until she believed him. When they finally came together in the big bed, it was with tenderness and growing passion, and Jessica felt the last walls around her heart crumble. This was what she had been missing, not just the physical connection but the emotional intimacy, the sense of being seen and valued and loved. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Grant's hand stroking through her hair. "I love you," he said quietly. "I know it is fast, but I do. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you stepped off that stagecoach, trying so hard to be brave despite being terrified." "I love you too," Jessica whispered. "I did not expect to, but I do. You have given me back my life, Grant, more than my life. You have given me hope." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and Jessica slept more peacefully than she had in 3 years. The next weeks and months were a blur of learning and adjusting. Jessica threw herself into ranch life, learning to milk the cow, tend the garden Grant had planted, cook on the wood stove, and help with the lighter ranch chores. She learned to read the weather by the sky, to know when cattle were sick by their behavior, to mend harnesses and clothing with quick, efficient stitches. Grant was patient with her mistakes and quick to praise her successes. They worked side by side during the day and fell into bed exhausted but content at night. Jessica had never been happier. There were still difficult moments. On their first trip to town together as a married couple, they encountered Mrs. Turner again, this time with several other women. The looks they gave Jessica were cold and judgmental, and she overheard one of them say loud enough to be heard, "I suppose he was desperate enough to take anything, even damaged goods." Jessica felt the familiar burn of shame and anger, but before she could react, Grant turned on his heel and walked straight up to the group of women. "Ladies," he said, his voice like ice. "I heard that comment, and I want to make something very clear. My wife is worth 10 of any of you. She is kind, hardworking, brave, and beautiful. The only thing damaged around here are the manners of people who think it is acceptable to mock someone for surviving a tragedy. You should be ashamed of yourselves." He took Jessica's hand and led her away, leaving the women staring after them in shocked silence. Jessica was trembling, but this time it was not with shame. It was with love and gratitude for this man who stood up for her so fiercely. "Thank you," she said when they were alone. "You do not need to thank me for common decency," Grant replied, "though I am sorry you have to deal with such small-minded cruelty." "It does not hurt as much when you are beside me," Jessica said honestly. "You make me feel strong enough to face it." As autumn arrived and the leaves turned gold, Jessica discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when she finally missed her monthly courses twice in a row, she was certain. The news filled her with joy and fear in equal measure. She desperately wanted a family with Grant, but she worried about childbirth, about being a good mother, about passing her scars on to a child. She waited until after supper one evening to tell him. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, and Jessica took his hand. "Grant, I have something to tell you." He turned to her, concerned by the seriousness in her tone. "What is it?" "I am pregnant. The baby should come in the spring, April or May, I think." For a moment Grant just stared at her, and Jessica felt a flicker of worry. Then a smile broke across his face, so wide and genuine that it transformed him. "Truly, we are going to have a baby." "Yes," Jessica said, and found herself smiling too. Grant swept her up in his arms, spinning her around and laughing. "This is wonderful, the best news." "Oh, Jessica, you have made me the happiest man in Wyoming." He set her down gently, suddenly concerned. "Are you feeling all right? Do you need anything? Should you be resting more?" Jessica laughed. "I am fine. Pregnant women are not invalids. I can still work, at least for a while yet." But Grant insisted on taking over the heavier chores, and he fussed over her constantly, making sure she ate enough and rested when she needed to. Jessica found it endearing rather than annoying, this evidence of how much he cared for her and their coming child. Winter came early that year, with snow falling in October and temperatures dropping well below freezing. The ranch work became harder, focused on keeping the livestock fed and alive through the brutal cold. Jessica learned to dress in layers, to wrap her face against the biting wind, to move quickly between the house and barn to minimize exposure. She also learned that Wyoming winters were isolating. Some days the snow fell so thick and fast that they could not see 10 feet beyond the house. They were completely cut off from town for weeks at a time, dependent on the supplies they had laid in and their own resourcefulness. But Jessica did not mind. In fact, she loved those cocooned winter days, just her and Grant and the life growing inside her. They spent evenings by the fire, Grant reading aloud from books while Jessica knitted small garments for the baby. They talked about names, about the future, about how to add on to the house to make room for a growing family. "I want our children to know they are loved," Jessica said one night, her hands resting on her swelling belly. "I want them to grow up feeling secure and valued the way I did before the fire." "They will," Grant promised. "We will make sure of it." Christmas came and went quietly, just the two of them and a small celebration. Margaret and William managed to visit for a few hours when the weather cleared, bringing gifts and news from town. Margaret was delighted to learn about the baby and immediately began planning a quilting bee with the few ranch wives who lived nearby. "You need a proper baby quilt," Margaret insisted. "I will organize it for February when the weather might be a bit better." Jessica was touched by the offer and grateful for Margaret's friendship. It made the isolation easier, knowing she had at least one true friend. January was the hardest month, with temperatures dropping so low that water froze solid in minutes. One of the cattle died, unable to survive the cold despite their best efforts, and Grant spent 3 days with frostbite on his fingers from working outside too long. Jessica tended to him, warming his hands carefully, wrapping them in cloth soaked in lukewarm water and scolding him for not coming in sooner. "I had to check the rest of the herd," Grant protested. "We cannot afford to lose more." "And we cannot afford for you to lose your fingers," Jessica shot back. "Promise me you will be more careful." "I promise," Grant said, chastened. February brought a slight warming and Margaret organized the promised quilting bee. 4 other ranch wives came, along with Margaret, and they spent the day at Grant and Jessica's house, stitching together a beautiful quilt from squares of fabric in shades of blue and yellow. Jessica was overwhelmed by their kindness, by the way they welcomed her into their circle without judgment or comment about her scars. "We ranch wives have to stick together," one of them, Sarah, said with a smile. "This life is too hard to face alone. You are one of us now." It was the first time since moving to Wyoming that Jessica felt like she truly belonged, and she treasured it. March arrived with the promise of spring, the snow beginning to melt and green shoots appearing in the garden plot. Jessica was heavily pregnant now, her belly round and prominent, and she moved more slowly, tired easily. Grant was anxiously attentive, watching her constantly, ready to help with anything she needed. "I am fine," Jessica kept telling him. "Women have been having babies forever. It is natural." "That does not mean I cannot worry," Grant replied. In mid-April, Jessica's labor began in the middle of the night. She woke to cramping pains and a feeling of pressure and knew immediately what was happening. She shook Grant awake. "It is time," she said simply. Grant bolted upright, instantly alert. "I will ride for the doctor." "There is no time," Jessica said, another pain gripping her. "This baby is coming fast. You need to help me." Grant went pale but nodded. He had helped with calving and foaling enough times to understand the basics of birth, though this was very different from delivering an animal. He helped Jessica downstairs to the main room where the fire was still burning, made her as comfortable as possible, and gathered clean cloths and water. The labor was intense but mercifully short. Just before dawn, with Grant supporting her and coaching her through the pushing, Jessica gave birth to a healthy baby boy. His first cries filled the room, and Jessica sobbed with relief and joy as Grant placed the baby in her arms. "A son," Grant said, his voice thick with emotion. "We have a son, Jessica." The baby was perfect, with a full head of dark hair and gray-blue eyes like his father's. Jessica counted his fingers and toes, examined every inch of him, and fell completely in love. "What should we name him?" she asked. They had discussed names for months but never quite decided. Grant looked at his son, then at Jessica. "What about James? It was my father's name." "James Calloway," Jessica said, testing it out. "I like it. James it is." The next weeks were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. James was a good baby, healthy and strong, and he nursed well. Jessica was tired constantly, but she had never been happier. Grant was a devoted father, taking over even more of the household chores so Jessica could rest and recover, and spending hours just holding his son, staring at him in wonder. "I cannot believe we made him," Grant said one evening, James asleep on his chest. "He is perfect." "He is," Jessica agreed, watching them together. Her heart felt so full she thought it might burst. As James grew, so did the ranch. Grant expanded his cattle herd and began breaking more horses to sell. Jessica helped where she could, managing the house and garden, keeping the accounts and caring for James. It was a good life, full and busy, and she loved every minute of it. When James was 8 months old, Margaret came to visit and found Jessica in the garden, the baby playing in the grass beside her while she pulled weeds. "You look happy," Margaret observed, settling down beside her. "I am," Jessica said simply. "Happier than I ever thought I could be after the fire. Grant and James, this ranch, this life, it is everything I did not know I needed." "He is a good man, Grant is," Margaret said. "And you are good for him. He was so lonely before you came, even if he did not show it. You have made him whole." "He did the same for me," Jessica said softly. That evening, after James was asleep and the house was quiet, Jessica and Grant sat on the porch watching the stars come out. Grant's arm was around her shoulders and she leaned into his warmth. "You ever regret it?" Grant asked quietly. "Coming here, marrying me, this life?" Jessica turned to look at him, surprised. "Never, not for a single moment. Why would you ask that?" "I know it is not easy," Grant said. "The isolation, the hard work, the way some people in town still treat you. I just want to make sure you are happy." "I am more than happy," Jessica said firmly. "Grant, before I came here, I was not really living. I was just existing day to day, waiting for nothing. You gave me a reason to live again. You made me feel beautiful and valued and loved. This life we are building together is everything I could have dreamed of and more." Grant kissed her then, deep and long, and when they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you so much, Jessica. You and James are my whole world. And you are ours," Jessica whispered. The years passed in a blur of seasons and growth. James grew into a sturdy, happy boy, curious about everything and fearless. When he was 3, Jessica gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Lucy, who were as different as night and day despite being identical. Emma was quiet and thoughtful, while Lucy was loud and adventurous. The house was full of noise and laughter and love. Grant expanded the ranch further, taking on 2 permanent ranch hands to help with the growing herd. They built an addition to the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and expanding the kitchen. Jessica planted a larger garden and started keeping bees for honey. She also began teaching the children herself, as the nearest school was too far away for daily travel. Mrs. Turner and her circle of friends continued to give Jessica cold looks in town, but Jessica no longer cared. She had a family who loved her, friends in Margaret and the other ranch wives, and a life that fulfilled her. What did the opinions of small-minded busybodies matter against that? One day, when James was 7 and the twins were 4, Jessica caught sight of herself in the mirror while washing her face. She paused, really looking at her reflection for the first time in a while. The scars were still there, as prominent as ever, but somehow they looked different now. They were just part of her face, not the defining feature. She saw a woman who was tanned from working outdoors, with laugh lines at the corners of her eyes, and happiness in her expression. She heard Grant's footsteps on the stairs and turned as he entered the room. "What are you doing?" he asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Just looking," Jessica said, "thinking about how much has changed since I first came here." Grant kissed her temple, right over one of the scars. "You are even more beautiful now than you were then," he said. "Though I did not think that was possible." Jessica turned in his arms and kissed him. After all these years, he still made her heart race. "I love you." "I love you too," Grant said. "Forever." From downstairs came the sound of the children arguing about something, and they both laughed. "Duty calls," Jessica said. They went downstairs together to referee whatever dispute had arisen. And as Jessica looked around at her home, her husband, her children, she felt profound gratitude for the courage it had taken to step off that stagecoach in Wheatland all those years ago. She had been so afraid, so uncertain, and look what had come of it. Love, family, home. Everything she had lost in the fire she had found again here in Wyoming, rebuilt from nothing into something beautiful and strong. Years continued to pass, each one adding new memories and experiences to their lives. When James turned 10, Grant began teaching him ranch work in earnest, showing him how to rope cattle, mend fences, and care for the horses. James took to it naturally, and Grant was proud of his son's developing skills. The twins grew into lively 6-year-olds, both of them wild and fearless in ways that terrified and delighted Jessica in equal measure. They learned to ride before they could properly read, spending hours in the saddle exploring the ranch with their father or older brother watching over them. Jessica's life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch was prosperous now, with a good reputation for quality cattle and well-trained horses. Grant had earned respect throughout the territory, and by extension, so had Jessica. Most people who had judged her in the early years had either changed their minds or learned to keep their opinions to themselves after repeated confrontations with Grant's fierce defense of his wife. Mrs. Turner, however, remained stubbornly unpleasant. Now in her late 50s and just as judgmental as ever, she still made pointed comments whenever she encountered Jessica in town. Jessica had learned to ignore her for the most part, but it still stung occasionally. One particular day in June, when Jessica was in town buying supplies with the children, she encountered Mrs. Turner outside the general store. The woman looked at the 3 children with obvious disapproval. "Mrs. Calloway," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "What a lovely family you have. Though I must say, I have been wondering whether your children will inherit your unfortunate condition. Scars can run in families, you know." Jessica felt fury rise in her chest, but before she could respond, 7-year-old Lucy stepped forward, her small face fierce. "My mama is the most beautiful woman in the world," Lucy declared loudly. "And you are just a mean old lady who nobody likes. Come on, Mama. Let us go." Lucy took Jessica's hand and tugged her toward where their wagon was parked. James and Emma followed, James giving Mrs. Turner a cold look that was remarkably similar to his father's. Once they were alone, Jessica knelt down to Lucy's level. "Thank you for defending me, sweetheart, but you should not speak to adults that way." "But she was being mean to you," Lucy protested. "Papa says we do not let anyone be mean to family." "Your papa is right," Jessica said, pulling Lucy into a hug. "And I love that you stood up for me. Just try to be more polite about it next time." When they returned home and Jessica told Grant what had happened, he laughed with delight. "That is my girl," he said, swinging Lucy up into his arms. "Though your mama is right, you should try to be more polite. even to people who do not deserve it. That night, after the children were in bed, Grant and Jessica sat on the porch as they often did in the summer evenings. The sky was full of stars, and the air was warm and sweet with the scent of Jessica's roses growing along the porch rail. You ever think about what life would have been like if you had not written to the matrimonial agency? Jessica asked. Sometimes, Grant admitted. I suppose I would still be alone, or maybe would have married someone else eventually. But I cannot imagine it. Cannot imagine a life without you and the children. You are all so fundamental to who I am now. I think about what would have happened if I had been too afraid to come, Jessica said. If I had let my fear of rejection keep me in Philadelphia, I would have missed all of this. All of you. Grant took her hand and kissed her knuckles. I am glad you were brave enough to take the chance, brave enough to believe me when I said the scars did not matter. They still bother me sometimes, Jessica admitted, when people stare or when I catch my reflection unexpectedly. But then I remember that day you traced them and called me beautiful, and I believe it again. You are beautiful, Grant said firmly. The most beautiful woman I have ever known, inside and out. And I will keep telling you that every day for the rest of our lives if that is what it takes for you to believe it. Jessica smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. I do believe it, most days anyway. You have given me that gift, along with so many others. When James turned 15, he was already as tall as his father and capable of doing a full day's work on the ranch. Grant began talking about eventually passing the ranch to him, about the legacy they were building. Jessica loved watching father and son work together, seeing the pride in Grant's eyes when James showed skill or good judgment. The twins, now 11, were becoming young ladies, though they both still preferred riding and outdoor work to traditionally feminine pursuits. Jessica taught them sewing and cooking, but she also taught them to shoot, to track, to handle horses, all the skills they would need as ranch women. Life was good, full of work and love and purpose. The ranch continued to prosper, and Grant and Jessica's marriage deepened with each passing year. They had been married nearly 15 years now, and Jessica loved Grant more with each one. He had kept every promise he made to her that first day, had been a true partner in every way. One evening, Margaret and William came for supper, as they did regularly. After the meal, while the children played outside and the men discussed cattle prices, Margaret and Jessica cleaned up in the kitchen. You know, I remember when Grant first told me he was writing to a matrimonial agency, Margaret said, washing dishes while Jessica dried. I thought he was making a mistake, that he could not possibly find the right match that way. I am so glad I was wrong. So am I, Jessica said with a smile. You two are good together, Margaret continued. The way he looks at you, even after all these years, it is like you are still newlyweds. And you have built something really special here with your family and the ranch. It gives me hope, you know, that real love and partnership are possible, not just romantic fiction. It is not always easy, Jessica said honestly. We have had our struggles, our disagreements. But we work through them together, and that makes all the difference. Grant has never made me feel less than, never treated me as anything but an equal partner. That is worth more than I can say. As the years continued to roll by, Jessica watched her children grow into capable young adults. James at 18 was a skilled rancher, respected by the hands who worked for them. He had started courting a young woman from a neighboring ranch, a sensible girl named Catherine who treated him well. Jessica approved and looked forward to hopefully gaining a daughter-in-law. The twins at 14 were inseparable but distinct. Emma had developed a love of animals and spent hours caring for the horses and cattle, gentle and patient with even the most difficult creatures. Lucy had inherited her father's head for business and helped Jessica manage the ranch accounts. quick with numbers and blessed with good instincts about when to buy and sell. Grant at 43 was graying at the temples, but still strong and vital, still capable of a full day's work. He and Jessica were planning for the future now, thinking about how to help James and Catherine start their own place, about whether the twins would want to stay on the ranch or seek their own paths. Jessica herself was 40, and she looked at her life with wonder sometimes. 22 years ago, she had been a broken woman with no hope, convinced her life was effectively over at 18. Now she had a husband who adored her, 3 healthy children, a prosperous ranch, and a deep sense of contentment. The scars were still there, of course, faded somewhat with time but still prominent. But Jessica rarely thought about them anymore. They were just part of her, no more defining than the gray beginning to thread through her dark hair or the calluses on her hands from ranch work. One summer evening, when the whole family was gathered on the porch after supper, James asked about how his parents had met. "I know Mama came from Philadelphia as a mail-order bride," he said, "but I never really heard the whole story." Jessica and Grant exchanged a look, and Grant smiled. "Your Mama answered an advertisement I placed, looking for a wife. We wrote letters back and forth for a few months, and then she traveled all the way from Philadelphia to Wheatland to meet me." "Was it love at first sight?" Lucy asked romantically. Grant looked at Jessica, his gray-blue eyes warm. "For me, yes. The moment I saw her step off that stagecoach, trying so hard to be brave even though she was terrified, I knew she was someone special. It took a bit longer to convince her to feel the same way about me, though." "That is not true," Jessica protested, laughing. "I was falling in love with you from that first day when you defended me against those awful people in the hotel." "People were mean to you, Mama?" Emma asked, troubled. Jessica hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "Some people were. They judged me because of my scars, thought I was not good enough for your father. But your papa never saw me that way. He has always made me feel beautiful and valued, even when I struggled to believe it myself." "You are beautiful, Mama," James said firmly. "Anyone who says different is a fool." Jessica felt tears prick her eyes at her children's automatic defense of her. "Thank you, sweetheart. But the important thing is not what anyone else thinks. It is what we believe about ourselves and the love we share as a family. That is what matters." That night, after the children had gone to bed, Grant and Jessica lay together in the darkness, his arm around her, her head on his chest. "That was a good evening," Grant said softly. "I love our family, Jessica. I love the life we have built." "So do I," Jessica whispered. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life, that I get to have you and the children, this home, this happiness. It feels like a dream." "It is real," Grant assured her, "and it is forever. I am never letting you go." "Good," Jessica said, "because I am never leaving." Grant tilted her face up and kissed her, slow and deep. The kiss of a man who had loved his wife for over 20 years and would love her for 20 more. When they made love that night, it was with the comfortable intimacy of long-married partners who knew each other's bodies and hearts completely. Time continued its steady march. James married Catherine in a beautiful ceremony at the church in Wheatland, and within a year they had a daughter, making Jessica and Grant grandparents. Holding that tiny baby girl, Jessica was overwhelmed with gratitude for the long path that had led her here. The twins both decided to stay on the ranch, Emma managing the livestock and Lucy handling the business side. They showed no signs of wanting to marry anytime soon, content with their work and their close relationship with each other. Jessica was proud of their independence and strength. When Grant turned 50, they threw a party at the ranch, inviting all their friends and neighbors. It was a testament to how much things had changed that the house was full of people celebrating with them, accepting Jessica completely as part of the community. Even some of the women who had been cruel to her in those early years came, though Mrs. Turner notably stayed away. As Jessica looked around at the celebration, at Grant surrounded by well-wishers, at their children and grandchild, she felt completely content. This was what she had dreamed of during those dark years after the fire, though she had not dared believe it possible. She had a family, a home, a place where she belonged. Grant found her watching from the doorway and came over, slipping his arm around her waist. "Happy?" he asked. "Incredibly," Jessica said. "You, more than I can say," Grant replied. "You have given me everything, Jessica, everything that matters." "We gave it to each other," Jessica corrected. "That first day when you traced my scars and called me beautiful, you gave me back my life. Everything since then has been built on that foundation." Grant kissed her temple, right over one of the scars. "And I will keep calling you beautiful every day for the rest of our lives, because it is the truth, and because I love you more than anything in this world." "I love you too," Jessica said. "Always." They stood together watching their family and friends celebrate, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. The Wild West had brought them together, but love had made them a family. Years continued to pass peacefully. They added more grandchildren to the family as James and Catherine had two more children, boys this time. Emma eventually married a gentleman who worked at the neighboring ranch, and Lucy shocked everyone by falling in love with the schoolteacher from town, a bookish young man who adored her fieriness. Grant and Jessica gradually stepped back from the day-to-day running of the ranch, passing more responsibility to their children while still remaining active and involved. They had built something that would last beyond them, a legacy of hard work and love. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Grant took Jessica back to Wheatland, to the hotel where she had stayed when she first arrived. It had been renovated over the years but was still recognizable. "You remember how terrified you were?" Grant asked as they stood outside. "I remember feeling like my whole future hung in the balance," Jessica said, "like I was taking the biggest risk of my life." "And was it worth it?" Grant asked, though the smile in his voice said he knew the answer. "Every moment," Jessica said firmly. "Every single moment, good and bad, has been worth it. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." Grant pulled her close and kissed her, there on the street in full view of anyone who cared to watch. When they pulled apart, Jessica saw Mrs. Turner watching from across the street, as sour-faced as ever at 70-some years old. Jessica smiled and waved at her, refusing to let the woman's perpetual disapproval touch her happiness. Mrs. Turner turned away with a huff, and Jessica laughed. "Some things never change," she said to Grant. "Let her be miserable if she wants," Grant replied. "We have better things to do with our time." They spent the day in town, shopping and visiting old friends, before riding back to the ranch as the sun set. The journey was familiar now, every turn of the road known by heart, but Jessica still loved the view as they crested the final rise and saw their home spread out below them. The house was larger now than when she had first seen it, expanded multiple times to accommodate their growing family. Smoke rose from the chimneys and lights glowed in the windows. She could see figures moving around outside, their children and grandchildren who had come for the anniversary celebration. "Home," Grant said softly. "Home," Jessica agreed. That night, surrounded by family, Jessica felt the completeness of her life settle over her like a warm blanket. She had survived tragedy and loss, had found the courage to start over in an unknown place, and had been rewarded with more love and happiness than she had ever imagined possible. Grant stood and raised his glass. "I want to make a toast," he announced. 30 years ago, I placed an advertisement seeking a wife. I had no idea that the woman who would answer would change my entire life, would give me children and grandchildren and a love deeper than anything I had dreamed of. Jessica, you are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. Thank you for taking a chance on a lonely rancher and his wild Wyoming dreams. Here is to 30 more years together. To 30 more years, everyone chorused, raising their glasses. Jessica felt tears on her cheeks but did not wipe them away. These were happy tears, earned through years of love and partnership. Grant came to sit beside her and she leaned into his familiar warmth. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Grant replied. "Forever and always." As the celebration continued around them, Jessica thought back to that frightened young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Wheatland 30 years ago. If she could go back and tell that woman what the future held, she would hardly believe it. But every word would be true. The scars that had seemed like the end of her life had actually been the beginning. They had brought her to Grant, to Wyoming, to this full and beautiful life. She would not change a single thing, not even the fire that had caused them. Because without that tragedy, she would never have found this joy. As the evening drew to a close, and the family began departing to their own homes, Grant and Jessica stood on the porch waving goodbye. When the last wagon had disappeared into the darkness, they remained standing there, Grant's arm around Jessica's shoulders. "It has been a good life," Jessica said softly. "The best," Grant agreed. "And it is not over yet. We have years ahead of us still." "I look forward to every one of them," Jessica said. "As long as I have you, I have everything I need." Grant kissed the top of her head. "You will always have me. That is a promise I made 30 years ago, and it is one I will keep until my last breath." They went inside together, closing the door on the cool night air. The house was quiet now, just the two of them like it had been in the beginning. Jessica banked the fire while Grant locked up, their movements synchronized from years of shared routine. In their bedroom, they undressed and climbed into bed, fitting together as naturally as breathing. Jessica traced the lines of Grant's face in the darkness, memorizing them even though she knew them by heart. "What are you thinking?" Grant asked softly. "That I am the luckiest woman alive," Jessica replied. "That I have been loved by the best man I have ever known. That my life has been everything I hoped for and more." "I am the lucky one," Grant said. "You gave me a family, a home filled with love, a purpose beyond just working and surviving. You made me whole, Jessica." "We made each other whole," Jessica said. "That is what love does. It completes us." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, two souls who had found each other across distance and circumstance and had built something beautiful together. The years that followed were gentle ones. Grant and Jessica grew older gracefully, their love deepening with each passing season. They watched their grandchildren grow, added great-grandchildren to the family, and remained the heart of the ranch even as their children took over the daily operations. On quiet evenings, they still sat on the porch watching the sunset, still talked for hours about everything and nothing, still reached for each other in the night. The passion of youth had mellowed into something deeper and more profound, a love that had been tested by time and hardship and had emerged stronger for it. Jessica's scars faded to silver lines as she aged, barely noticeable among the wrinkles and sun damage that came from a life lived outdoors. Grant's hair went completely white, and his body grew stiffer from decades of hard work. But to each other, they were still the young couple who had married in a small church in Wheatland, full of hope and determination to build a life together. When Grant was 70, he had a bad fall from his horse that laid him up for several weeks. Jessica nursed him through it with patient care, and he joked that she was even bossier as a nurse than as a wife. But the incident reminded them both that their time was finite, that they needed to cherish every moment they had left. "I want you to know," Grant said one evening as he recovered, "that marrying you was the best decision I ever made, that every day with you has been a gift." "I know," Jessica said, taking his hand, "because I feel exactly the same way. You saved me, Grant. You saw past the scars to the woman underneath, and you loved her. You will never know how much that meant, how much it still means." "I did not save you," Grant said firmly. "You saved yourself by being brave enough to come here to take a chance. I just had the good sense to recognize what a treasure you were and hold on tight." Jessica kissed him, soft and sweet. "However it happened, I am grateful. For you, for our family, for this life. I would not change a single thing." They lived several more good years, seeing their family continue to grow and thrive. The ranch prospered under the management of their children, and the Calloway name became synonymous with quality and integrity throughout Wyoming. When Jessica was 73 and Grant was 75, he passed away peacefully in his sleep one cool autumn night. Jessica woke to find him gone, and though her heart broke at the loss, she found comfort in knowing he had died content, surrounded by family, in the home they had built together. At his funeral, the church was packed with family and friends, a testament to the life he had lived and the man he had been. Jessica stood at the graveside, supported by her children, and said her final goodbye to the man who had been her partner for 50 wonderful years. After Grant's death, Jessica lived for 3 more years. She remained at the ranch, cared for by her children and grandchildren, content to spend her final days in the place she had called home for more than 5 decades. She spent her time with the great-grandchildren, telling them stories of the old days, of their grandfather Grant and the love that had built this family. On a warm spring day, much like the day James had been born, Jessica passed away quietly in her sleep. She was laid to rest beside Grant, and the headstone bore a simple inscription that her children had chosen together. Jessica Zimmerman Calloway, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, beautiful in every way. At the funeral, Lucy stood to speak, tears streaming down her face. "Our mother taught us many things," she said. "She taught us to work hard, to be strong, to face adversity with courage. But most importantly, she taught us about love. The love she shared with our father was the foundation of our family, and it was built on mutual respect, partnership, and unwavering commitment. She showed us that true beauty comes from strength of character, from kindness, from the courage to be vulnerable. She was scarred by tragedy but never broken by it. She built a life of meaning and purpose, and she leaves behind a legacy of love that will endure for generations. Mama, we love you. Tell Papa we said hello." The family gathered at the ranch after the funeral, sharing memories and stories. The house was full of people, multiple generations of Calloways who owed their existence to the brave mail-order bride who had stepped off a stagecoach in Wheatland 55 years earlier, and the cowboy who had seen past her scars to the beautiful woman within. As the sun set over the Wyoming mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, the family stood together on the porch Grant had built, looking out at the land that had been shaped by his and Jessica's labor and love. It was a fitting tribute to a remarkable couple who had proven that true love could overcome any obstacle, that beauty was more than skin deep, and that the scars we carry can be transformed from marks of tragedy into badges of survival and strength. The ranch continued on, passed down through the generations, each one adding their own stories and memories to the legacy. But at its heart, it remained what Jessica and Grant had made it, a testament to love, partnership, and the courage to believe in second chances. The end.